The initial reveal at E3 2014 for The Division defied our expectations of what a Tom Clancy game was. It wasn't just a stealth tactical shooter anymore. This was the first breakthrough into the realm of MMORPGs. At the same time, it seemed very groundbreaking, but was plagued with bugs and gameplay issues that took years for the development team to work out, which resulted in the big loss of the game's player base. So with the upcoming Division 2 slated to be released in a couple of months, almost 3 years have passed since the first game's release, which gave Ubisoft ample time to work out the kinks and add other lots of great content to the game. The story takes about 20 hours for your initial playthrough, in which you are tasked with maintaining order in the post-apocalyptic New York after a chemically engineered virus almost completely decimates the entire city's inhabitants. The concept is innovative, but the final product is ultimately hindered by a number of factors. The main missions are repetitive, PvP is hard to master and is predatory to beginners, and your character never speaks even though the game is an RPG, so it's not really story driven. But at the same time, it's also unique since the Tom Clancy series has not had a game like this before. They made plenty of military shooters like Splinter Cell, Rainbow Six, and Ghost Recon, but The Division is the first of the franchise with these RPG and looter shooter features. You can tackle missions with up to 3 other people in PvE gameplay with drop in and drop out system. You can also invite players you find in bases around the city or just invite your friends. There's also a PvP arena sectioned off from the map called the Dark Zone, where you can go with 3 other squad mates and kill enemies to obtain rare loot. However, in this area, any loot drops are contaminated and need to be extracted via copter, and player killing isn't able to, so you also need to watch out because any player you find may seem friendly at first, but later be revealed to have hostile intentions. So, there have been several DLC expansions that were made available after the initial release of the game. The first was the release of Incursions, which were missions that take place after the events of the main story and are more difficult than regular missions, so they give up top tier loot upon completion. Next, developers came out with the Underground, where players venture through a labyrinth of tunnels underneath the city, so you have to complete randomized objectives. Then they added Survival, which was Ubisoft's getting their feet wet by delving into the realm of battle royales. However, instead of killing other players and being the last man standing to finish the match, the end goal is to enter the Dark Zone, which I mentioned earlier, and extract antivirals, and killing players is just an optional side objective if you are in the PvP mode. Following the release of Survival, Ubisoft released 2 PvP DLC modes, which were The Last Stand and Skirmish. The Last Stand was just a King of the Hill game mode, where you had to defeat other players and AI enemies, so it was a nice way to condition players for organized PvP, but your main objective was to capture control points instead of killing players, with killing players being just an optional objective. Skirmish was the first full-fledged organized PvP mode, and this is a classic 4-on-4 team deathmatch, where the first team to 20 kills wins. For the final expansion, Ubisoft shifted back to PvE with the Resistance DLC, which was a horde mode game type where you and your squad have to hold off as long as you can manage against endless waves of enemies. Each of these expansions is fun to play in their own right, because no 2 DLC modes feel the same. And now for the gameplay mechanics, this is where it gets a little tricky. So your character has 3 main attributes, which are firearms, so weapon, damage, and RPM. You have toughness, which is your health and armor, and electronics, so your skill power. And all of your gear will be calibrated towards one of these stats for each piece of gear you have. And you can save custom loadouts to switch between these gear combinations when needed. For some build guides, you can check out my previous videos for that. Loadout results can vary between players. You can have, for instance, a DPS build, glass cannon build, tank, healer, support. You can use a balanced character when playing easier missions by yourself, but for the more difficult missions, it's better to diversify your team into set roles to increase your chances of the mission success. That being said, there's no right or wrong loadout to use for most missions because they can be completed with just about any set combination. You can customize your character to tailor a specific role, as I mentioned before, by managing the weapons and gear that you've equipped. So you get basic gear at the start of the game, but as you level up and fight more difficult enemies, you'll obtain higher tier loot. So there's always a constant grind to find better and better gear, because your character evolves as you level up and progress. Also, equally important, you obtain skills as you progress, which can help you during combat, particularly for skill builds. You also eventually gain access to a signature skill, which is like an ultimate skill in this game, which can boost either weapon performance, your self-healing, or armor level. And as a bonus, they apply to all team members within range of the user upon activation. You can only have 2 primary skills and 1 signature skill, so you'll have to decide what to have equipped based on the mission or the roles your other squad members have chosen. The gunplay is also another aspect where this game shines. Each weapon looks and feels completely different from the others. When choosing weapons, you have to take into account the range, damage, RPM, stability, and more. For example, SMGs shoot at extremely high speeds with average magazine sizes and little recoil, and they reload quickly. But LMGs, on the other hand, are capable of about the same RPM, but double the clip size, higher recoil, and a long load time. They typically have more base damage than an SMG. Weapons all have their own unique stats and bonus talents, which all ties into the most important part of PvE, the time to kill NPCs. As you play the game, you'll encounter several enemy factions and different types of enemies within each of these factions. Each of these have distinct visual and behavioral features, and each enemy type in these factions have their own movement patterns and attack style, so it's advisable to keep an eye on your surroundings and act accordingly. One of the biggest problems is that once you've reached the max level, which is level 30, the Division becomes a number game. On harder difficulties, a single enemy can kill you and your entire team in no time, but soak up bullets with ease, so you're forced to crunch numbers in an effort to output as much damage and armor as possible. This isn't really an issue on normal difficulty, then anything higher than that will be extremely challenging, though this can be alleviated depending on your team skill and individual player builds for each of your squad members. For PvP, players run in packs and the entire squad focuses fire on one person at a time to eliminate a rival squad. The time to kill players is fairly long and there are many variables to consider, so for instance, using a DPS build would do more damage, but you'd be lacking in health, or you could use a healer build, but the enemy's weapon could damage you quicker than your HP could replenish your health, and you wouldn't have enough firearms to make a dent in their health. Or you could be a tank, but you would have neither the firearms or the healing ability to recover the health from the damage that players would deal to you, so that's one of the issues. And Massive has released patches over time to deal with this, but to almost no avail, because encounters with rival agents are extremely hectic. They strafe non-stop, they burst heal, so it helps to have a set that ends fights quickly with a lot of damage, or just an overwhelming amount of HP to outlive your opponent, because skill builds aren't really gonna help you kill somebody in PvP. And as a disclaimer, PvP is not tactical whatsoever. You just run and gun, heal, then repeat. That being said, I do still occasionally play PvP mode just to test out my skills against other players, because under these demanding conditions, it's extremely satisfying when you do manage to kill somebody, because you know all your hard work and effort actually amounted to something. The snow-covered map of Manhattan is fairly large, with many areas and locations to explore. What adds to the apparent size of it is the absence of any working vehicles, however. There are countless disabled cars littered along the streets, but now they only serve as cover for enemy fire. You can venture into apartment buildings, scale ladders to walk across rooftops, rappel down into Manhattan's sewer system, and tour subway systems to explore every inch of the city. The game's environment is crafted in great detail, which is shown in both the interior and exterior designs throughout the city. Many of these details go unnoticed when you're running around from one mission to the next, but if you take the time to walk around for a minute, you'll see the intricate components that the developers took their time to include. You'll most likely do the majority of this exploring through the city, finding data left by rogue former Division agents, military officers, and ordinary civilians that paint a picture of how life used to be before your arrival into Manhattan and how everything was destroyed in the virus's aftermath. My favorite intel to find are the echoes, which are 3D holographic reconstructions of the virus's Armageddon, pieced together by audio recordings and discarded surveillance data. It provides an alternative to cutscenes, of which this game has very few to begin with, and is a creative way to integrate fragments of the past into the story. Though the game looks incredible, the character models are just okay. Facial customization is very restricted, with only a few handful of presets to choose from. However, you are able to wear different clothes and masks to distinguish yourselves from other players. The Division is a very ambitious game that's unlike any other in the Tom Clancy franchise. It's a third-person cover-based military looter shooter RPG, and though those elements may not blend well in theory, the execution of it really works. The PvE loot grind is tedious but rewards those who are patient, and the PvP, while difficult at first, with enough practice and experience under your belt, you'll be able to mow down entire squads with ease. It has a good campaign and some interesting expansions, and a large map to explore, so overall this is a fairly well made game. And though by no means is this game perfect, it did allow Ubisoft to step out of its comfort zone and explore a more unique variant of the military shooter genre, and has left many of us waiting in anticipation for the upcoming sequel.